The Locust War was a planet-wide conflict across the planet Sera between the humans and the subterranean race that was later known as the Locust Horde. This was a 17-year-long war that began when the Locust Horde emerged from the underground caverns of the Hollow and began their genocidal campaign against humanity. The Locust War had many brutal battles and significant events that both turned the tide of the war in the humans and the Locusts' favour across the 17-year-long bloodshed. So as always, I'm your host Abz, and I will be giving you a full, long breakdown of the Locust War timeline in Gears of War lore. Emergence Day 0AE. 6 weeks after the armistice between the coalition of ordered governments and the Union of Independent Republics to end the 79-year-long Pendulum Wars, the Locust Horde emerged across the planet in every major city in a planned and coordinated attack on the surface of Sera. The first 26 hours of the attack became known as Emergence Day, as the devastation suffered at the hands of the Locust was unlike anything ever witnessed before. The first city reported to be attacked was Janamont in the nation of Tyrus. The UIR nation, which was the Republic of Groznyj, was also decimated. The attacks by the Locust Horde were led by the newly appointed High General War RAAM, while the Republic of Groznyj was annihilated by armies led by the Locust General Khan. An emergency response was quickly initiated, and the coalition swiftly mobilized armed forces to defend Sera. However, some major cities were not attacked, as some were naturally protected by oceanic trenches, like the South Islands, Azora, and the Lesser Islands chain. It became apparent that the safest place on Sera were cities located on the Jacinto Plateau, within the nation of Tyrus, as the natural granite bedrock was too impenetrable for the Locust to dig through. But the fate of humanity and history had vastly changed, all in a single day, as billions of Serans, or roughly 25% of the world population, were slaughtered on Emergence Day. This day would become the most significant event in the Gears of War timeline and universe. Occupation of Sera 0 to 1 AE. In the aftermath of the destruction on Emergence Day, the COG shortened basic training and began drafting more gears to fight in the Locust War. In the months that followed, the Locust Horde kept emerging in major cities and defeating and occupying them, and then scavenging any spoils of war from the cities occupied. The common strategy that the Locust used to occupy human cities was to summon the bizarre hollow creatures known as Seeders. They would launch organic mortars known as Nemesists into the city's skies, releasing a thick, toxic ink cloud. The Nemesis infestation would cut off human communications, but also allowed for the carnivorous hollow creatures known as the Krill to swarm the city before nightfall, essentially becoming a Krill storm. The Krill would then devour the surviving humans in the city during nightfall, and thus allowing the Locust Horde victory and occupation of the city. A major city that was lost during this time period was Halvo Bay. This city was one of the few that had a strong military influence and presence, being the home of the COG's Elite Special Operations Unit, the Onyx Guard, and therefore the destruction of Halvo Bay was a major loss to the COG. The invasion was led by General Khan and the Shibboleth, who had previously and successfully destroyed the Republic of Groznyj and then marched to destroy Halvo Bay. An illegal operation led by Damon Baird managed to destroy the Museum of Military Glory's base that General Khan was attacking by using the Lightmass missile from Onyx Point, and therefore killing thousands of Locust. During the court-martial of Kilo Squad for their rogue actions which was interrupted, they were able to defeat General Khan, who was personally executed by Colonel Ezra Pound Loomis. Kilo Squad was acquitted of all charges, but Halvo Bay remained mostly destroyed and lost to the Locust Horde, with Colonel Loomis of the Onyx Guard also being killed. During the end of the first year of the Locust War, the Locust Horde pinpointed the cog capital of Ephyra as their main target, but Ephyra was defended by the Jacinto Plateau, and the Locust realised that they couldn't dig under Ephyra, so the Locust settled on taking each city outside the Jacinto Plateau as stepping stones to reach Ephyra on the surface. In the third month of 1 AE, which was known as Rise, the COG chairman, Thomas Dalliel, died in office of cardiac arrest, and therefore his deputy chairman, Richard Prescott, was then elected by the Council of Sovereigns as chairman of the coalition. The Hammer of Dawn strikes, 1 AE. Only 2 months later, on the 30th day of the month Bloom, 1 AE, the newly elected chairman, Richard Prescott, had made a major announcement that would change Seran civilization forever, giving civilians only 3 days to evacuate secured cities before initiating the devastating Hammer of Dawn strikes and incinerating the majority of Sera's surface outside of the Jacinto Plateau. This was done in order to deny the Locusts' advancement and occupation of Sera, displacing their efforts for several years, but it did not eliminate the Locust Horde, as the majority of them originated from the Hollow. Prescott also made 2 other major decisions. The male civilians that did survive the Hammer of Dawn strikes and lived in COG jurisdiction were conscripted to the war effort, and all female citizens were conscripted to the birthing creche in order to repopulate the planet. Millions of people were killed from the hammer strikes, and the cities on the Jacinto Plateau became overpopulated by refugees. The hammer strikes also caused multiple environmental problems, such as large ash clouds, and many areas across the planet became uninhabitable, which came to be known as the Deadlands. Those killed by the hammer strikes in some cities, such as Char, were frozen in ash statues, portraying their last final moments before the immediate heatwave killed those exposed. But millions of humans also survived the strikes, and they became known as the Stranded. They rejected COG jurisdiction and became hateful and distrustful of the COG, as the coalition was willing to sacrifice their own people. The remaining cities on the Jacinto Plateau were then fortified, as it was the last major beacon of humanity. Locust Mobilization, 1 to 9 AE. The hammer strikes caused chaos and disruption, and therefore both the COG and the Locust Horde regrouped. The COG focused on their defense of the last remaining cities on the Jacinto Plateau. Meanwhile, the Locusts began their mobilization to reach Ephyra by taking each city along the way. The Locust Horde's geneticist, Ukon, led armies of genetically engineered hollow creatures and attacked human cities, and he was able to destroy many. COG Intel was able to gather information on Ukon, and therefore prioritized taking him out. He was known as the monster that made monsters, so the COG wanted to stop the weaponizing of these monstrous creatures from the Hollow. Thus, Sergeant Gabriel Diaz and his squad were tasked with an assassination mission on Ukon to stop his destructive armies and to prevent the Locust from reaching Ephyra. Sergeant Diaz, his squad, and his stranded recruits were successful in assassinating Ukon with the help of Reina Torres, the daughter of Queen Myrrah, which was a fact that was unknown at this time. However, they discovered the truth of the Locust Horde's origins, as Private Sid Redburn was a former guard at the New Hope Research Facility, and he and Ukon both recognized one another. In order to keep the truth hidden, Prescott attempted to kill Diaz and his squad, keeping them from returning to the COG, and therefore the squad basically became stranded, or pretty much their own rogue faction. Diaz and his forces dedicated themselves to destroying Ukon's remaining creations. But the death of Ukon further set back the Locust for several years. But the years between 1 and 9 AE haven't been explored in much detail as of now. So by 9 AE, the Locust continued to push for occupation of more cities on the Jacinto Plateau in order to reach Ephyra. After a series of defeats for the COG and great losses of life, Chairman Prescott ordered Operation Lifeboat into effect. This was to recruit stranded men and women, as the COG's military numbers had been impacted heavily. Most stranded refused the offer, while some of them accepted, in return for transporting their families to more secure regions in Jacinto. During 9 AE, the Locust attacked the city of Alima on the Jacinto Plateau. This attack was led by War RAAM. The Locust used a krill storm to darken the skies, and used the krill themselves as a weapon during the day against the humans. The COG were aware of the coming attack, and so they led an evacuation of the city, but War RAAM advanced the attack by leading Locust into the city to set up seeders to speed up the inking of the skies and the krill storm. Zeta 6 managed to kill a few of the seeders with the Hammer of Dawn, but they were simply too late to stop the krill storm. Zeta 6 escaped at the last minute with survivors from Dr. Gregory Wisen's orphanage. Meanwhile, RAAM was left wounded, but still alive. The Fall of Ephyra, 10 AE. In the 9th month of 10 AE, known as Frost, the Locust were finally able to lead a full assault on the COG capital city of Ephyra. They did this by exploiting fissures in the granite and dug into the metro and sewer tunnels of Ephyra. Over 10,000 Locust drones had invaded the city. The battle had reached as far into Ephyra as East Barricade Academy, and this was where Haldane Hall, or simply Adam Phoenix's estate, was located. The Locust had managed to reach his home of Haldane Hall, and were preparing to capture him in order to continue his work in destroying the Lambent, as the Locust were still fighting them and being infected underground. Marcus Phoenix abandoned his position against Colonel Hoffman's orders to use the Hammer of Dawn to destroy Chancery Bridge to prevent the Locust Horde from reaching the other half of Ephyra. Instead, he went to Haldane Hall in an attempt to rescue his father, taking part of the targeting laser for the Hammer of Dawn with him alongside Dom and his squad. Upon arriving at Haldane Hall, Marcus reunited with Professor Adam Phoenix and arranged for his father's evacuation via King Raven. However, a boomer shot down the King Raven, which then crashed into Haldane Hall. The debris then collapsed on Professor Phoenix, and it seemed as though he was killed. Marcus and his squad were taken from the scene, while Colonel Hoffman was able to destroy Chancery Bridge without the missing piece of the targeting laser, but at that point, Ephyra had been overrun. Marcus Phoenix was court-martialed for treason, and he was initially to receive the death penalty, but was argued by Dom to instead receive a life sentence of 40 years at the Jacinto Maximum Security Prison, or also known as the Slab. But Professor Adam Phoenix actually didn't die during the battle. He was rescued by a team of Onyx guards and taken by Chairman Prescott's orders to Azora, a secret island bunker that sheltered the greatest minds of science, military, and industry since the Pendulum Wars. Just before the fall of Ephyra, Professor Phoenix's assistant, Neville Estrom, discovered Professor Phoenix's knowledge and intel on the Locust Horde and Lambent prior to Emergence Day, and he reported it to Chairman Prescott. So therefore, Prescott kept Adam Phoenix on Azora in order to find a proper countermeasure to the Lambent, which would soon become a threat to humanity. Professor Phoenix decided to inject himself with concentrated doses of imulsion to study its effects and its life cycle. Preparing the offensive, 11 to 14 AE. The Locust were successful in invading and occupying Ephyra, but they were unable to capture Professor Adam Phoenix and force him to continue his work on curing lambency, so the Queen and the Locust were still desperate to escape their war against the Lambent. Queen Myrrah realised that in order to destroy both humanity and the Lambent, the Locust would have to destroy Jacinto City, as it was the last human stronghold that the Locust could not possibly dig through. Queen Myrrah's plans were based on the original advice that Professor Adam Phoenix gave her, that sinking Jacinto City would collapse the Jacinto Plateau and allow the surrounding seawater to flood the entire hollow network, drowning everything under the surface. And then, once the Horde would reach Jacinto City, Queen Myrrah would evacuate her entire people to the surface and destroy Jacinto, drowning the Lambent below and dispersing the humans with no safe refuge on Sera. Now during this part of the Locust War timeline, the Locust would pick up more victories on the Jacinto Plateau in their attacks in areas of Jacinto and other cities. Therefore, Colonel Hoffman prepared a major campaign to gain an upper hand on the Locust Horde and potentially destroy them. Hoffman was also in need of gears since millions had died since E-Day, and as a result he was forced to pardon all of the inmates from the Jacinto maximum security prison and conscript them as gears. But the slab came under siege by Locust, and Hoffman allowed Dom to try and save Marcus, purposefully not stopping him and instructing Dom to take Jack with him. So this leads us to the Lightmass Offensive, 14 AE. In the second month of the year, Hoffman initiated this operation, and therefore this is where the events of Gears of War 1 take place. The plan was to locate the Locust Stronghold in order to destroy the Locust Horde. The sonic resonators were developed, which were devices planned to be used to pulse sonar waves to map the Locust tunnels, essentially creating Locust tunnel mapping data. With the data, the Lightmass bomb would be launched into the heart of the hollow and destroy the Locust Horde. But unfortunately, General RAAM quickly learned of the COG's plans and set up an ambush to take out Delta Squad's leader, Lieutenant Min Young Kim. In the words of Queen Myrrah, cut off the head of the snake and the body dies. Although Delta Squad lost their leader, they were actually in luck because Marcus Phoenix was out of prison and he was a Pendulum Wars hero and a Locust War veteran before he was sent to the slab. Hoffman of course knew Marcus's strengths, and for the greater good of the war effort promoted Marcus to sergeant and in charge of Delta Squad, and Delta now also included the remnants of Alpha Squad, who were the Gears Damon Baird and Augustus Cole. Delta Squad planted one resonator at the nearest hollow entry point, and this was the Lithia Emulsion facility, but unfortunately it didn't work, as the hollow network was just too large and advanced for one machine to completely map. But in the Emulsion facility, Baird discovered a Geobot, a device that contained a 3-dimensional map of the Locust tunnels. Anya discovered that Professor Adam Phoenix was the programmer of these Geobots, and the source was at Haldane Hall, the home of Marcus Phoenix. So Marcus and Delta fought their way back to the Phoenix estate and retrieved the tunnel data in order to deploy the Lightmass bomb. But this was no easy task in the slightest, because this bomb was boarded on a speed train, which was called the Tyro Pillar. But not only that, General RAAM was at the front of the train to stop the offensive. Marcus and Dom, with the help from air support, put an end to the mighty General RAAM, cutting the head of the Locust Horde's army. The mapping data was inserted into the Lightmass bomb and deployed into an Emulsion Lake sinkhole. The deployment of the Lightmass bomb was a major loss to the Locust Horde, but unfortunately only the outer hollows were destroyed. The COG claimed premature victory, but the Locust weren't dead just yet. The Locust Counterattack, 14 AE. The Krill breeding grounds were destroyed, which led to the Krill being 99.9% extinct. The operation gave the COG a major psychological boost, and the COG dropped leaflets over stranded camps, claiming that the Lightmass bomb had won the war, and that the stranded should rejoin Seran society. COG forces were able to recapture the capital Ephyra, as well as Timgad, Ilima, and some other areas. But unfortunately, the Lightmass bomb evaporated a lot of the emulsion into the atmosphere in Timgad City, and soon an epidemic of Rustlung swarmed the stranded and gears that were stationed there. The infected Serans living near the Timgad area were brought to the Jacinto Medical Center, but the COG covered up the full effects of the disease. The evaporated emulsion also continued the Lambent epidemic. Humanity was trying to rebuild, but so was the Locust Horde. The true Locust stronghold actually resided within the inner hollow, which was Nexus. The Locust General RAAM was killed, along with the Krill and many Locust forces, but a major event took place that turned the tide in the Locust's favour once again. The Lightmass bombing awoke the long dormant, prehistoric, gargantuan creature known as the Riftworm, who was seen by the Locust as their god. This not only bolstered and reaffirmed the Locust Horde's beliefs, but also gave the Locust their final opportunity to destroy Jacinto City. Keita Scourge was promoted to Uzil and replaced General RAAM, and both Scourge and Queen Myrrah believed they could use the Riftworm to destroy other cities on the Jacinto Plateau in order to weaken the base and allow for them to tunnel. After the monstrous Riftworm began sinking neighbouring cities, and the Locust began to complete desperate raids, the Coalition feared that the power the Locust brought with them would be enough to eventually destroy Jacinto. Chairman Prescott was left with little options. Humanity was more desperate than ever before, and so he finally ordered an all-out assault on the Locust stronghold. This would become the biggest operation of the Locust War. Operation Hollow Storm, Winter 14 AE. Towards the end of the year, this complete assault was devised by sending Gears into the inner hollow to destroy the Locust Horde and their stronghold from within, to deploy where the Locusts lived and bred, and finally, this time, take the fight to the Horde. The assault derricks were designed to carry grind lifts. These were laser-guided transporter drills to send Gears down through the soil and land in the inner hollow right on the Locust's turf. Chairman Prescott delivered a final motivating speech to thousands of Gears, and then a mass of assault derricks, King Ravens, APCs, and Centaur tanks transported the Gears from Jacinto City to Landdown. This was because Landdown was the nearest place to drill the Gears down through the soil within the Jacinto Plateau, but a huge Locust army intercepted and attacked in Stromson Forest, which led to many casualties. However, the majority of the Gears managed to arrive in Landdown, many of them deployed and drilled down, whilst Keita Scourge captured many Gears as prisoners of war before they were able to deploy. Keita Scourge summoned the gargantuan Riftworm to sink Elima City, and then the Gears in the inner hollow converged into the Elima sinkhole for battle. The Cog witnessed firsthand the Locust's new powerful weapon, as well as their ways of torturing captured prisoners, which was known as processing. Delta Squad were devoured by the Riftworm, however they were able to kill it from the inside, dealing a devastating blow to the Locust. But the initial wave of Hollow Storm was seen as a failure, as the Locust stronghold was not accurately pinpointed. Therefore, Chairman Prescott, out of desperation, declassified the COG intel file on the New Hope research facility, as Delta Squad were sent to investigate the quote-unquote decommissioned COG outpost to find intel on the Locust stronghold and the Locust Queen. Delta then discovered that the New Hope research facility imprisoned and experimented on children of imulsion miners sick with rust lung, and these children were genetically experimented on to find a cure, mutating into what Dr. Niall Sampson called the Sires, with none of this information found on any COG files. Upon finding the personal log of Dr. Niall Sampson, he revealed that the COG was shutting down the facility and that he would be taking the Sires to the mountain named Kadar, giving Delta Squad an idea of the location of the Locust stronghold. The Locust then attacked the facility and guarded Mount Kadar as Delta traversed the mountain. Delta Squad managed to locate the Locust highway that led to their true stronghold, Nexus. Delta then arrived at Nexus and activated Jack's beacon, revealing Nexus and allowing for Gears to drill down and assault the true Locust stronghold. During the battle, it was discovered that the Locust were fighting glowing forms of Locust. These were originally their own allies, but the Lambent was an epidemic that had been occupying the Hollow and attacking and infecting the Locust. In the Royal Palace, in the command center, there was a file of Professor Adam Phoenix advising the Locust to sink Jacinto City in order to flood the Hollow and drown the Lambent. Marcus Phoenix sent the file to command with an alternative plan to sink Jacinto City, urging that they had to sink Jacinto before the Locust evacuate, not after. Therefore, Marcus and co realized that all this time, the Locust were desperate to escape the Hollow, which the Cog was never aware of, and why they waged war against humanity on the surface in the first place. The Gears then evacuated Nexus and returned to Jacinto. The Coalition evacuated their citizens to Port Farrell, while they defended Jacinto from the Locust assault and prepared to sink the city. Marcus and Dom were crazily able to hijack a Brumac to clear the tunnels below Jacinto and prepared it for the Lightmass bomb. However, the Brumac started to become lambent and aggressive, destroying the King Raven that was carrying the Lightmass bomb. The Brumac had continued to mutate into a giant lambent creature, which also meant it was extremely volatile. So Delta Squad used the Hammer of Dawn to destroy the lambent Brumac, with its death causing a massive explosion to sink Jacinto City underground. The Jacinto Plateau was destroyed, and the surrounding seawater flooded the entire Hollow network, drowning the majority of the Locust forces and destroying the Locust's home and Nexus. But unfortunately, this also caused the emulsion in the Hollow to rise to the surface, polluting the ocean, soil, and infecting all forms of life. Therefore, this led to the Lambent Pandemic, 14 to 17 AE. Lambency became a global pandemic, transmitted when the host inhaled emulsion fumes, which acted as infectious spores. The risk of infection was highest when within closer proximity to emulsion refineries. Transmission could also occur from the body of a recently deceased host or from fruiting bodies, which were known as lambent stalks. Lambency was vigorously mutating its hosts, and these mutations varied in size, shape, and appearance, depending on the host and the environment. When the majority of a host's cells were colonized by emulsion, the host became lambent, driven to infect or kill any non-infected organisms. So the pandemic caused the disbandment of the coalition of ordered governments in 15 AE, 18 months after the sinking of Jacinto. Chairman Prescott abandoned the Cog and vanished, turning the last remnants of the Cog into stranded, just like everyone else. Now, all who were left on Sera were refugees, remnants of the UIR, pockets of the Cog, stranded clans, limited members of the Locust Horde, as well as Locust who turned savage, as well as a devastating Lambent. Queen Myrrah and her surviving Locust managed to finally track down the Maelstrom barrier that protected and concealed the island of Azora. The Locust dived under the hurricane, infiltrated the island, and turned off the barrier, allowing the rest of Myrrah's forces to invade and occupy Azora. The Locust, based on Myrrah's orders, killed all of the scientists and the Onyx Guard, but spared Professor Adam Phoenix, in order for him to complete his work on saving the Locust Horde. Adam Phoenix realized that the Locust wouldn't kill him, but they might destroy the countermeasure weapon if he wasn't there to defend it, and so he created a message for his son, Marcus Phoenix, to rescue him and help him end the Lambent Pandemic, and so he vowed to stay behind. So Adam Phoenix gave the message to Chairman Prescott so that he could escape, find Marcus, and bring reinforcements to save him and stop the Locust. Marcus Phoenix and Delta Squad took residence on board the CNV Sovereign along with many other Gears and civilians, but soon lambent stalks began to emerge from the ocean around the ship. Prescott returned to what was left of the Cog, bringing a message to Marcus from his father, revealing that he was still alive all this time and was being held captive by the Locust. Prescott and his Onyx Guards were unfortunately killed by the Lambent attacks, but before Prescott died, he handed Marcus the encryption key for the data disk that Hoffman was holding onto. Delta Squad managed to regroup after the horrific Lambent Leviathan attack, and set out on the mission to get across the Sera Deadlands in order to get to the cog garrison, Anvil Gate, which Colonel Hoffman and his forces were defending. Delta Squad hijacked a gas barge, they saved Dizzy, and then they flew over the Anvigard plains on their way to Anvil Gate, but they crash landed near Anvil Gate as Locust forces were en route. Baird worked on the data disk using the encryption key as the rest held off the Locust and Lambent attacks, and it revealed information on Azura and the Maelstrom barrier, so they needed a submarine from the Endeavour naval shipyard, and then fuel from either Mercy, which was Dom's wife Maria's hometown, or the city of Char, which was a city destroyed by the Hammer of Dawn and then occupied by Stranded, and this was not going to be an easy task because both sites held imulsion refineries. Hoffman, Bernie and their forces continued to defend Anvil Gate. Meanwhile, Baird, Cole and Clayton Carmine were sent to find reinforcements for when they retake Azura. Meanwhile, Delta 1 would travel to Mercy. Delta then discovered that the Lambent Sea had jumped the species barrier again and was capable of infecting humans. After fighting the infected, Delta managed to turn on the fuel pump and returned to Dizzy and the trucks, but they were intercepted, and so they engaged in a three-way battle with the Locust and the Lambent. They were running out of ammo and didn't have the manpower to last much longer against both the Locust and the Lambent. They were going to die, it's as simple as that. So, Dom Santiago, after losing everything he was fighting for, made a final decision to sacrifice his life by driving a truck into the fuel tank, exploding the gas station and killing all of the Locust, the Lambent, and himself. Saving Delta, and most importantly, saving his brother Marcus, the ultimate sacrifice to allow his brother to save humanity. But Delta needed more fuel, so they travelled to the city of Char, where the most ruthless stranded gangs lived, who were ruled by the CEO of Griffin Emulsion Corporation, Aaron Griffin. After assisting Griffin's people in a battle against the Lambent, Delta requested fuel for the rest of their journey, but unfortunately Griffin Tower came under attack by Queen Myrrah's Tempest and the Locust forces. Delta managed to rescue Dizzy and repel the Locust forces, but the stranded were all wiped out, with Griffin now being the sole survivor of his settlement. Delta then refueled their transport and went on to the shipyard. During this time, Baird and Cole managed to arrive in Halvor Bay, a city they were once familiar with, and met up with a former comrade from the early years of the Locust War, Garen Paddock, where they gathered the remaining UIR forces and relocated the Gorazny ship into the waters. And then Delta 1 arrived at the Endeavour naval shipyard and found and successfully prepared a submarine to take off into the Serrano Ocean. Victory Day 17 AE. Delta 1 took 26 hours in the Serrano Ocean to reach Azura, after dodging a Leviathan, taking out deadly mangler fish, avoiding cog mines, and destroying underwater turrets. Upon arrival, Marcus ordered Dizzy to take the submarine offshore, while the rest discovered that the Locust had executed the civilians of Azura. After taking out the Locust forces and shutting down the generators that Adam Phoenix advised, the facility was still active. Professor Phoenix suggested to Delta to shut off the coolant, resulting in the Maelstrom barrier to overheat and explode. So Delta 1 was successful in overheating and destroying the Maelstrom barrier, which allowed Baird, Cole, and the remaining COG and UIR reinforcements to arrive at Azura Island. But this would also reveal the island to the Lambent, and this was also where Marcus revealed Dom's death to Baird and Cole. Fighting through the Locust and the Lambent, Delta 1 was met by Queen Myrrah, who revealed that Adam Phoenix promised her years before Emergence Day that he would stop the Lambent and save the Locust. She was desperate for him to finish his task, but Delta 1 dropped a counterweight on her Tempest, seemingly killing her. Marcus and Cole finally reached the top of Pinnacle Tower and rescued Adam Phoenix. Marcus and his father were reunited after 7 long years. Professor Phoenix revealed to Delta that he had known of the Locust and Lambent's existence years prior to Emergence Day, that he persuaded for Myrrah to keep her people underground, but failed to keep his promise to Myrrah to save the Locust, resulting in them invading the surface and commencing the Locust War. Adam Phoenix then prepared his command keys and took himself and Delta to the rooftop of Pinnacle Tower to start the imulsion countermeasure. On the rooftop, they eliminated the Lambent and Locust forces, and so Adam Phoenix began to prepare the imulsion countermeasure. But once again, Myrrah reappeared and threatened to destroy Marcus and the countermeasure weapon. Delta managed to take on the Queen's Guard and killed her Tempest mount using the Hammer of Dawn. The imulsion countermeasure began to operate, just as Professor Phoenix revealed that he injected himself with imulsion to study its reproduction in order to target the radiation and kill the imulsion cells. The imulsion countermeasure weapon then vaporized all Lambent organisms on Sera, including Adam Phoenix himself. Meanwhile, all of the Locust creatures collapsed and developed an impenetrable crystalline shell around their bodies. Once again, Myrrah was still alive, but Marcus personally killed Queen Myrrah with his late brother Dom's commando knife. The Locust and Lambent were defeated, and the Locust War and Lambent Pandemic finally ended, giving humans the victory of both wars and managing to survive an era of apocalyptic proportions. The Locust War began on Emergence Day and ended on Victory Day. Humanity on Sera finally had a tomorrow to look forward to. And that, my friends, is the full Locust War timeline in Gears of War lore. Drop a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this lore video. If you want to support me and the channel further, then you can also become a channel member, and that would be greatly appreciated as well. Thank you for your support as always. I'm your host Abz, and I will catch you guys next time.